possiamo togliere questo, dici?
Ah no,
Sì.
sì? Ah, che bello.
Questa distanza. Okay. Maybe we just wait 1 minute for more people to come, and then we go. The bells, 6 o'clock.
Danno addormentarsi.
Hello, good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to welcome everybody to Ocean Space. We are in the former church of San Lorenzo, which is the exhibition venue of TBA 21 Academy in Venice. Welcome to all of you, the many of you in presence, and also whoever is joining us online. I am Barbara Casavecchia. I work as curator, in this case for TBA 21 Academy, and a cycle called The Current in its third iteration, and specifically Mediterraneans, thus waves come in pairs after El Adnan, as my research cycle is titled. I am very happy to have with us today, to my right, Giorgio Andreotta Calò, and to my left, Cristina Baldacci and Shaul Bassi, who we're all gathered here on a special occasion because it's actually two special occasions. The first one being the Anthropocene Campus Venice, that then Cristina and Shaul will tell us definitely more about, but which has been organized as a 1 week forum by the Center for Humanities and Social Change by Ca' Foscari and the Max Planck Partner Group, the Water City. And the other special moment is the Ocean Uni, which is an open platform for studying and learning together and exchanging knowledge that we're trying to expand, also as a form of community online and, again, whenever possible, in presence, as today. The title for the semester of the Ocean Uni, which is currently unfolding, is quite apt for the occasion because we called it Ways to Wade Through Water, and has also storytelling, I mean, as a method and as a way of inquiring through methodologies. So I am more than happy to pass the mic to Cristina and Shaul, and I would also like to ask them to introduce the Anthropocene campus for all of us who are coming from the Ocean Uni side so that they can learn a bit more about it, and also why this is again, another form of collective pedagogy, and how does it work as a method. So thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm Shaul Bassi from Ca' Foscari University of Venice, Director of the Center for the Humanities and Social Change and the coordinator of the Master's Degree in Environmental Humanities. Before I say a few words about this, I would really like to say, as a Venetian, that ocean space has been the most important addition to the cultural landscape of the city in years. And I mean it when I say that ocean space is a relatively recent enterprise, but I no longer remember a time where there was no ocean space. And I think this is such an important site because it is the only one that has, say, embraced the sea in a city that has largely repressed its century-old relationship with the sea. This is a wonderful opportunity to renew our partnership with Ocean Space. We have been doing a lot of different things together. Suffices to say that the Master's Degree of Environmental Humanities was inaugurated in this very room by our fellows last year. So we want to continue our collaboration on many fronts here at the university, walking around as we have done with Barbara and with all Ocean Uni participants. And of course, it's a special opportunity to share this event with the partners who have made the Anthropocene campus possible. And on this note, I will leave to Christina to introduce our seminar because she is the real person behind this whole seminar. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Shaul. Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Giorgio. So I will be very short because we're all thrilled to know about your work, Giorgio. So let me just say for those who don't know, who are following us via streaming, that this event is part of the huge program of the Anthropocene Campus Venice. The Anthropocene Campus Venice is divided in 4 main seminars. It has been organized as a collaboration between Ca' Foscari University and Haus der Kultur in der Welt and the Max Planck Institute in Berlin. It is part of a longer project, research project and educational project that started in Berlin at Haus der Kultur in der Welt, the Anthropocene curriculum, which has been organizing together with various cities, various campuses around the world. And so this is the latest episode or reunion. And we are very thrilled because the Anthropocene campus is divided in 4 main seminars to foster interdisciplinary debate. And our seminar, so we are thrilled because today is one of the occasions in which we have a big space where we can almost all be together. So we are 3 seminars out of 4. So welcome all. It's so great to see you all here in this space. And this talk is also part of Seminar 3. So the seminar that Shaul and I were organizing. And Seminar 3 is about, so the title of Seminar 3 is Aquaphobia and Beyond, the Water Politics of Representation. And the main, let's say, disciplines that we are bringing into discussion are literature and visual, performative and media arts. And so this is why we tried also to give a lot of different occasions to talk also with artists. And this is, of course, one of the main meetings that is part of our program. So why aquaphobia and beyond? Because our seminar starts from, or the idea of our seminar from Of course, the main theme of the campus are the water politics in the Anthropocene. We started from a VR installation or work of a Danish artist, Jacob Kudstindsen, which is entitled Aquaphobia, so the fear of water. Of course, it's not just about the fear of water, as we have been discussing in these days, but it goes beyond. So the discussion goes beyond the fear of water and involves a lot of different perspectives from which we can discuss about water, Anthropocene, and the different disciplines. Lacuna, Giorgio's work, is perfect for this discussion, and we are really thrilled and happy to can go in depth into Giorgio's work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I will pass the microphone to Giorgio. First, I would like to introduce Giorgio and just read a bit of his biography for those of you who may not know him. Giorgio is an artist born in Venice, based in between Venice and the Netherlands. He studied at the Accademia di Belle Arti here in Venice, but also at the Kunsthochschule in Berlin. In 1928, he moved to Holland, where he was artist in residence at the Rijksacademie. And we will see later one of the works that were generated by that moment of studying. In 2011, he participated in the 54th Venice Biennale, directed by Bice Kuriger with the work Ritorno, which was a 1200 journey on foot from Amsterdam to Venice. In 2012, he also won the Italian Contemporary Art Prize promoted by the Museo Maxi in Rome with an installation that had a presence of water. And in 2017, he was one of the 3 artists chosen to represent Italy in the pavilion curated by Cecilia Alemani at the 57th Venice Biennale. In the same year, he won a very important and crucial prize by MIBACT for the execution of monumental installation that was then presented in 2018 at the Oude Kerk in Amsterdam. And curiously enough, we're in another huge church, which resonates with that work. And in 2019, he was the protagonist of a solo show organized by Hangar Bicocca in Milan under the title of Città di Milano, curated by Roberta Tenconi. What we would like to talk about today is Lacuna, a project that was commissioned by TBA 21 Academy for our program and took place very recently in June 2021. It was another walk which covered the entire perimeter of the lagoon for about 270 kilometers. So we know that you measured it with your body by walking alone clockwise for around 10 days. But I would leave it to you to describe what Lacuna was. Why did you choose a title suggesting a gap? And maybe we can start from there. Grazie, Giorgio.
Okay, thanks for the introduction, very long introduction. Starting from the title of this action, Lacuna, we should think about the etymological and phonetical origin of the word lacuna. It's close to the term laguna, lagoon, but lacuna itself comes from the Latin lacus, so It reminds the idea of lake, but again, the idea of cavity, void, something which is missing. So I start from this word in order to try to fill this empty space, this void. And I try to do it not crossing a water space, which is actually the Venice Lagoon, but try to crossing it through its boundaries. I would like to read small note or statement related to this action, because it clarify the starting point of this action, and also because I prepared part of my talk like this. It's a long time I didn't speak in English because of the pandemic. I spent a long time in Italy, and I a bit forgot some words. So it's also nice to move steps by steps into this language. So, well, we are led by instinct to imagine a crossing of this liquid space via water. This is how I have always lived the lagoon, as an extension of Venice and its canals, and at the same time as an enclosed, protected space separated from the sea. I was interested in recognizing this place from what lies outside of it, that is, from a dimension of bodily crossing, by moving along its boundary line. I was interested in considering it as a void, a gap, to be gradually filled, slowly circumscribed and observed, to walk. Like a living organism, the lagoon advances and recedes. As you know, probably is moving every 6 hours up and down. So this is the movement which also regulates his breath, we can say. And breathing slowly and deeply is constantly expand its boundaries, invade the mainland, and then abandon it. This variable ecosystem determines the coordinate that govern the dynamic of walking along its edge, following the transformation of its landscape and complying to its flow, cycles, and tides, while trying to circumscribe the amphibious habitat of the lagoon. The path marked by the passage on foot is promptly erased by the tidal flow. This is actually a sort of, how can we say, fallimentary experiment.
A failed.
Yeah.
Why? While a failed experiment.
Well, the idea to trace something that it's again erased by the movement of the water means that the line that are you going to sign or to write, it's continuously change. So it's one of thousand and thousand different possibility to describe this void, and that's why we can say that it's a space in continuous changement, variation. It's not fixed at all.
Of course. I mean, I think we saw, for those of us who were here before, briefly a map which contained the outline both of the lagoon and of the walk itself. Of course, there's a paradox in trying to measure, I mean, that line that you were describing, because that line changes constantly. So one, as you were saying precisely, can mark just one version of that walk. But if you were to walk it again one day after, it would be different. And sort of 6 hours later would be different. So what does it mean to try and measure something with your own body by immersing yourself in that environment, to do it constantly, to do it, I mean, without intermission for 10 days? Then you are the archive somehow. I mean, it's your action which becomes the device to measure that space. And I think over the past few days, we had a few occasions of sort of both as experiences had by a number of participants here of walks or explorations or tracings of different trajectories around this space. But to me, it was always from the start this idea that you put in place, starting from the choice of the title, that somehow it's not really possible to represent that space. It's a constant tension. Instead of representing the space, somehow you reposition the fact that maybe it's a story you can tell, maybe it's an experience you had. We're seeing some images of documentation also that you took along the way, but after all, there is always this gap in between experiencing something and then finding a way to represent it. So what's your thinking behind that? I mean, why choosing to position yourself in this sort of in-betweenness, which is also, I mean, a tidal or liminal space?
In between, I just remember something I saw a few times during this walk, which is a particular structure which are located around the lagoon, are a kind of small tower, obelisk. They are called cippi, and that were used in order to sign the limit of the lagoon. This is something interesting in relation to the idea of water politics. So they start to define the size of the lagoon, the size of the water space in relation to the whole ecosystem, in order to have a sort of balance between emerged area and
submerged, or subaqueous or amphibious, but it was made by the Republic of Venice, I mean, before the fall of the Republic of Venice. So this also definition of what needed to be, I mean, considered water, and then falling under the legislation of Magistrato delle Acque, and what was considered solid, and then had to undergo a different treatment of its spaces and legislation too. Yeah, of course. And again, I mean, how this line kept changing through time, it's very obvious by the distance which is now existing in between those markers and the edge of the lagoon, for instance. You can totally see the change. So that's one way of measuring the change, but I think one of the questions we've been trying to explore a few times, what did you see during those 10 days? What was your experience of watching the lagoon in that very specific and unusual way? from close by. I mean, it was also very hot. It was the summer, so it was a labor-intensive action anyway. And what did you see that you hadn't seen before, because you're grown up in Venice? So how did it change your way of looking at the lagoon or understanding what that space is?
Well, I say few time that that make this journey around the lagoon, starting from my house actually, because I really start from my apartment in Venice, from my studio, and I make a circle all around the lagoon, and I came back to my studio after 10 days. The feeling was like if I just make a sort of journey outside my studio, because the starting point was Venice, and the arrival point was Venice again. So the feeling was to not really feel the distance at the end. It was like consider the lagoon as a natural extension of the city itself. It gives to me the possibility to see so many connection with this center, or consider Venice not anymore as a center, but try to watch the reality of the city from another perspective, and that was quite interesting actually. But again, I think the possibility to cross this area not with a boat, but by walking, and be yourself the measurement of the distance of this space was actually more interesting for me, instead to cross this space by boat, which is something I do quite often, because I use the boat, of course, to move around. But there's also many things that I cannot see, because was fenced, stopped, was close to my journey. It was not possible to enter, to go in actually.
So the enclosures are some of the things you've been seeing around the lagoon. I mean, how certain spaces are not accessible, or how they're treated or separated or protected also. I mean, but we have this idea of the lagoon as being as a unified space, but also it's not also in the way it is used in different parts, and what is made open for everybody to access, and what is not. In which part you couldn't access, for instance?
Well, there are a few parts of the lagoon that are owned by private, or there's probably an agreement with the state in order to use those space for fish farms, or also for hunting, caccia. But yes, again, it's just one time I was able to go in, but after, I don't know, 20 minutes, somebody comes to pick me up, and yeah, he showed me the way how to go out.
No rites of passage.
Definitely. So yeah, those places are completely out from the public cross, and in my opinion, it's not only a bad aspect or effect, because in some case they are also protected from the I don't say destruction, but they are quite well preserved. So,
Yeah.
well, that's open, of course, a discussion with Barbara.
Well, I was thinking that a couple of days ago we were here for the presentation of Metagoon, which is this incredible archive, which is being developed by Matteo Stocco, who's a local video maker. And during the presentation, one of the scientists who've been at work constantly, on observing the lagoon in collaboration with the fishermen also, was explaining us that, even if it's hard to imagine, but lots of fish coming to the lagoon, and one of the areas where they reproduce, where the sort of little fish will then grow and have ways of becoming adults, is actually really close to Porto Marghera, which is one of the most potentially polluted areas, but also restricted by access. And then for fish, it's a good area to be enclosed in before then having the possibility of reaccessing the lagoon. So I think we constantly need to rethink, how we imagine that space and for whom and for which species as well, because also in many of your images, there are no humans. So you're mostly looking at other inhabitants of the lagoons, which are plants, which are sometimes frogs or fish, or the land, the sort of the dry parts, the wet parts. So how did that element of observing, do you think, changed? And by the way, this is really meant to be a conversation. So if any of you has a question, please also jump in very informally, because it doesn't, wish to be, there is a question there. Anybody who would like to ask a question, just be kind and come close to the microphone here, so everybody can hear you, and also people from home.
All right, can you hear me? Yes, yes.
Yes.
So, just a very brief question. So, when my friend and Marco Ziglia, who you might know very well, told me about this project Lacuna, I immediately thought that Lacuna was because in the Venetian lagoon there's a lack of the Mediterranean climate, and the fact that there's a lack of Mediterranean climate because of the River Po and all the rivers coming from and having their foce in here. I thought that Lacuna was exactly because of this, because we say there's a Lacuna Alta Adriatica, and that's why we have basically the Lagoon of Venice. So have you ever thought about this?
I didn't quite understand the question, but
Can I?
Yes, of course.
So,
grazie.
no, I don't know if you might familiar with the term Lacuna Alta Adriatica. That is the lack of Mediterranean climate that happens in the lagoon, that's
So
the
you say
name.
that
I immediately thought that Lacuna was because of the lack of Mediterranean climate, and basically the Lacuna Alta Adriatica is why we have the Venetian lagoon. So I thought it was a correlation, but I don't know. So is there a correlation or no?
I will quickly translate, and then thank you for the question.
No, assolutamente. I didn't know that. Sorry, I didn't know that, and thanks to had this layer of knowledge. Yeah, I didn't know, but of course makes sense. Absolutely.
So you say it also marks a separation in between climatic areas.
Sure.
So Lacuna. Oh, thank you. It's really beautiful contribution. Atlantic climate. Mediterranean, Atlantic. Agreement. Okay. Do you have any questions before we move forward a bit? Oh, another question, please. Please come forward. because then I would also like to share more information about the relation between Giorgio's work and water. So plenty more coming. Thanks.
So thank you very much for this occasion, for your presentation, which is very interesting. I'm very interested into walking as an artistic practice, and I would like to ask you if this is a long-standing practice for you, or if it was just occasional, and what is walking to you in terms of artistic gesture? Thank you.
I can just quickly say that no, in fact, it's one of the reasons why we decided to commission this piece. Please.
Yeah. Well, of course, it's not the first walk I did. Walk, it's part of my artistic research. It's part of my own practice. Probably this is the first time that I decide to start from my own town and to return to my own town again, because a few times I use Venice or just as a starting point or to arrival point. For example, Barbara mentioned the biennial in 2011. In that occasion, I had a long walk from Amsterdam to Venice, for example, which takes much more time to mount. And well, it's funny because it was a walk through territory, through lands, but at the same time connect two cities which are facing the water or are in the water. So it was a sort of like the movement of a river somehow. And the idea was the return to the own city, Venezia, which is also in his name contained the idea of return. So it's Venietiam. So I came again, vengo ancora, ritorno.
That's again the Latin etymology.
Sì. The etymology, it's important also on the way how, for example, I use title or I find the starting point or the idea, the aesthetic idea of the walk itself. And walk, it's also the idea of movement. Movement not only has a physical movement, but also like artistic movement, politics movement. So the walk itself can embrace other meaning, of course, and it's not a radical or extreme practice. Everybody can walk, and that's why I found it such a powerful also in order to communicate to an audience or to a public what is this act finally, because everybody can do that, and we actually do also a collective walk after Lacuna, sorry.
Yes, this was a collective walk that about a month after Giorgio performed Lacuna, we decided to take all together as a group of people who were trying to experiment walking. I think the images here are by Giovanna Silva, who's a wonderful photographer and artist who also participated in the walk. So Giorgio led us around the lagoon. Literally, we walked along the line that separates the lagoon from the outer sea, and we went from one inlet to the other. So we went from one mose to the other. And we also measured with our own bodies, walking in line and in silence for a few days as a way of performing an act of observation, but also a collective observation that then left a lot of space for thinking about what we were experiencing before having the immediate possibility of translating it into words. I think that silence was a really important element of those days together, because suddenly when we could take breaks, then, I mean, things or words started to flow in a very different way, as if that movement was also. And I think it was also important to remark that I think we consumed a lot of energy, but we also consumed very little energy. I mean, it's a very simple act and also a very poor act, that of walking. It just requires your own capacities, I mean, to put into place that form of energy. But ecologically wise, it's quite interesting as a space to explore and use it as a device to look around and try and see a space and develop a form of proximity, of intimacy, and also, I mean, this idea of making kin becomes a bit more obvious when you're close to what you're looking at. So I know that there were questions, so please.
I'd like to ask a question that is connected to what Carmen Concilio was asking about walking. And it's a question about the dimension of time and the time, the temporality of your project. It seems to me that Venice has a profound impact on the people who visit it in terms of their perception of time, and the lagoon also changes the perception of time. So can you say something about your experience of time during this project? Is there a moment where, sorry, I put it in very blunt terms, that something changes after the third day or after the fourth day or the sixth day? Is it more the impact of the new spaces, the new landscapes of the lagoon, or is it also that time affects the project?
Well, I think it's a combination, actually, of both aspects. I mean, time and space are relate, of course, in the perception you have of your own journey. I can say that after 3, 4, 5 days, you start to jump into another feeling. You are really into the walk itself. It takes a while to reach this point, but it's probably connected also with this idea of meditation. Walk, it's step after step, so there's a sort of rhythm that you are going to repeat for a few hours, few days, sometimes a few weeks, sometimes a few months, if you're really somebody that walk a really long distance. So at certain moment, the perception of time, of course, it changed completely. We are not used anymore to move by walk. We are also use a mixture of I can say media, but transport. So we are completely lose our speedness, our natural speedness, and we lose also our capacity to register the reality with a human speedness. What I try to say is that also in the observation of the reality, using walk as a way of seeing gives you the possibility to really metabolize, to really metabolize what you are seeing, and this is something that I think it it comes clear also to the people that share with us the walk. So.
I would, before jumping to another question, I thought maybe it would also be interesting before expanding on further plans. I don't want to stop you, just.
No, it was just connected to what he was saying.
I would just suggest that maybe we also run through some of the projects that bring together Giorgio's work, his relation to water, and the relation that, I mean, he's been developing with this image of a city on water, or a dimension of living in that close proximity, because I think there's many implications, and we've been talking profusely about Lacuna, but it would also be interesting to have a look at some of his previous works, and then I will give you the mic.
Yeah, but it's connected to this, so I don't want to, then we can go into your work, but speaking of ways of seeing, maybe you could also tell us which role plays photography alongside walking, so during, when you walk, during your walking, and also after.
Well, I use photography beside of my practice more in order to get some notes. Sometimes I also used to wrote to take a diary, and actually we also present a book related to the walk, but specifically use photo. It's more a sort of note for me. There's also a logistic problem related to the walk. I'm used to walk with a tent, with a sleeping bag, with object that then I use to to the daily life, let's say. And a photo camera, it's not part of it because you cannot really carry this weight on your back. So after a few years, I decided to just use the camera that we all have in the phone, which is helpful because it's not so heavy to transport, and photography becomes just a sort of note of journey, of nota di viaggio. So I sometimes I watch it again in order to remember some aspect. This one, for example, it's interesting that comes right now because it's a picture that I took close to the ground, but if you watch some satellite image of the lagoon, you can see that there's a sort of relation between macroscope and microscope vision of the lagoon. The system of the canals are similar to the fragment that are created around the Earth. So there's always an interesting relation between what you can see from the distance and what you can see when you are close. And I like to register those aspects because then it's a way also when I come back home to see it and to think again. Sometimes I also collect only postcards, for example, and I found a place where I just passed by, and it's a way to yeah, to exercise a sort of memory, a sort of visual memory.
Okay. I would kindly ask to share some images of other works, because time flies, and then I would like to have the possibility of introducing also other parts of Giorgio's work. So if you can start from the work that was created for the Rijksacademie, for instance. It was a flooding. And I would like you to share the images, and then we can maybe ask more questions. So this one was Untitled, 2010. That was your studio at the Rijksacademie. And if you can just move on and share the images, then we also see what was the result, I mean, from inside the studio, and also these were images, and I think we've seen them in a different context a few days ago, because these are images of the great floods in Zeeland in the 50s, while other images from the Acqua Grande that took place in Venice in '66 were also at the back, I imagine, of your sources. Can you move them on? Or no, we lost them anyway. This is another work, carotaggi, which is core samples, where you extracted, I mean, from Canale delle Tresse, you're telling me, close to Porto Marghera, some core samples of what's, I mean, literally all the strata forming the Venice lagoon, so that you got to the very bottom, and then you found, you created an archive of what can be reconstructed through times and the layering of the different samples. And this is also, I think, how you exhibited parts of your findings in recent exhibitions at Città di Milano, but also recently at Litosfera at Museo Pecci, and as a cycle of works called Produttivo, which is productive, that I would lately like to ask you a couple of things about. It's the core samples reappeared in your work also after you acquired the archive from Sulcis Inglesiente, sorry, Carbo Sulcis. Sulcis is an area of Sardinia, which is a sort of huge island sitting next to Italy in the Mediterranean, which has been quite devastated by extraction of carbon, which is now, I mean, it's not happening anymore. It's not any more sustainable economically, but the entire attempt to reactivate an archive of fossil fuels was also part of that line of thinking. In that case, I think, what to do with archives, how to reactivate them. And if you can just move forward with other images. I'd like to share also. Yes, I just wanted to show the images of the work that was presented at the Venice Biennale in the Italian pavilion, which I think is, some of you might have seen. That was one of the works. In that case, it's titled, Untitled, La fine del mondo, but which translates as the end of the world. But I think it's also important to remember that the entire pavilion was referring to Il Mondo Magico, which is a beautiful book by an amazing Italian ethnographer who is Ernesto De Martino, who explains how our worlds are constantly ending and how, I mean, we respond to times of crisis with magical thinking. So I think the two things were correlated. So this was only one part of the work. This is not how one would have seen it immediately, because one would access from a lower, somehow underground or underwater space. And in this space, which was very dark, but was also giving you the impression of sort of wading through dark waters, there were also some presences that were the sculptures of pinna nobile, which is this beautiful shell, very large, that I mean, this is a bronze cast, but it's of course comes from the presence of pinna nobile in the lagoon as a living being which was disappearing and then reappeared as a form of resilience and sort of re-inhabiting of that space by a number of species which are not only disappearing but also appearing, coming back, or finding homes coming from different places. So I think that at least these works I wanted to share, I mean, in a sequence to give a scope of how water has been a key presence in your work. So two things. First, if there's any other question, please just raise your hand. Otherwise, I'm just going to take advantage of this to ask you. I mean, I know, I mean, it's kind of evident that, I mean, being born in Venice, water is most naturally a part of your visual landscape, but also why have you constantly worked around this image of water, of sort of trying to represent water, but also literally reproduce a condition of flooding in certain occasion, or a vast expansion of water?
Well, I think that if it's possible to go back to the Rijksacademie, this work was not seen by a lot of people like the biennial, because I was obliged to close the studio the day after the vernissage, the opening, let's say. But for me, it's interesting to introduce this work in relation to this idea of aquaphobia and the artist you mentioned before, Jacob, which I saw the work.
Yeah, and who is actually here, so
Okay.
we can also
Ciao.
invite him, or
Well,
he's yeah.
I find an interesting connection between this work especially and his work in terms of the approach. Both of us, we are trying to put the public in front of a possible scenario, to create a scenario, or to create a reality and bring the spectator into it. And I actually tried to do that in Amsterdam. That was more than 10 years ago. And in fact, the media, it's completely changed. The lexicon, it's completely changed. I feel so old. But the idea was to present to the public a possible scenario which is in fact the reality of that place in particular. Because Netherlands, as you say, it's mostly, I don't know if wetland is the right terms, but the the position of the Netherlands is depressing in relation of the
Below the
undersea
sea, yeah.
the sea level. 60% are under the sea level. If we take as a reference point Schiphol Airport, for example, it's 6 meters under the water level. But of course, when we are at Schiphol Airport, we are not feeling this, not because we are flying, but because we don't see a street floating or something. We have a sort of artificial perception of the reality, and this is something that it's in the Netherlands, it's really present somehow.
I think there was a beautiful lecture a couple of days ago by Florike Egmond, who really brought us into that visual dimension as well, and also the recording. And I think also in your work, and we don't see it, but the radio was transmitting the, well...
Yeah, the radio was broadcasting like the radio program about the floating in the Zeeland, so you can...
In 1953.
In 1953, and some extract of the floating in Venice in the 66. So I was trying to combine both situations. In Venice, the fact that the water are coming or was coming into the city quite often and cover all the street was a sort of natural fact for me as a child. So I calculate together with an agency, NAP, the level, the hypothetical level in my studio in Amsterdam, and the measurement was 1.80 meters. So I literally submerge the bigger part of my studio by water, and through this glass you can see the scenario. So you see a representation, a sort of Flemish paint, no? This is this idea of window
on reality.
On reality. But the day after the opening, I was in the studio in the smaller part, and by accident the window just cracked and explode. We laugh, but in fact it was no.
It was a real flooding.
A huge amount of water. So in this idea of representation, in this case, the reality really comes into, it's not virtual anymore. It really comes to the physical space, to the physical reality. And I say later, thanks God that this happened. Even if it was, of course, problematic for everybody, because we started to move water out of the Rijksacademie the whole night and the day after. But at this moment, the work itself really crossed this boundary of representation. So I think it's interesting how Jakob did to try to realize a possible scenario, which is probably it will become our reality in the future, just because the power of imagination is so strong that reality, it happened finally is represented. This is, I think, in our let's say field. It's something that we have to consider also as a artist, to create word, to create a scenario, to create images. Yeah.
Do you have any question, or would you like to join us, Jakob?
Yes, come here with us. So, Giorgio, Jacob, Giorgio.
So if you have any response or comment, it's more than
No,
welcome.
I was just very fascinated by your explicit language about the practice of walking. So that's something I work with a lot. And the project you did in Venice, all your photographies, I just finished a project in Arles in southern France in a wetland. And you were looking at many of the same things that I found, but I first found them after long periods of walking in a place. So I was thinking of this like both like sign making, you know, you're kind of interpreting and making signs, but also learning to read a landscape and how you can change your, the way that you read a landscape. And I mean, that just really struck me that I think we actually really share that in process. And maybe you can say something about like learning to read a landscape differently.
Sorry, and the piece is called Liminal Lens. So,
The one you developed in Arles.
so
Okay, from
speaking-
liminal lens to intertidal spaces in the lagoon.
Well, yeah, I think well, what I found interesting is the way how you collect fragments from from your landscape or your reality, and how you transfer this element into this scenario or this reality constructed. In my case, since I spend most of the time of my research in a similar context, which is the context of the lagoon, I literally collect a physical fragment, which becomes finally object, not abstract or virtual reality. So I think this is also the difference or the connection between two different approach, but probably also my way of intervention is related to a practice that came before yours, and in fact the approach it's different in this sense. And yeah.
If I can just share this question with both of you. Sorry, it's a very unusual position. I think one of the questions that was recursive over the past few days, it's also about, I mean, what's your position in terms of, I'm an artist, I'm a poet, I'm an activist, and so forth, as was discussed during the presentation of your work. And I know from your practice of walking that quite a few times the walks you organized were also in relation to, I don't know, for instance, the walk that you did from Genoa to Ventimiglia and back to Genoa was also strictly related to the memory of the G8, what happened in Genoa, what sort of world was imagined or was possibly imagined and then suppressed, and what does it mean to reenact certain collective movements by the simple act of walking. I know that this summer you re-walked the same walk, for instance, to remember that date, or you did walks in Sarajevo, or this also Gloria, which is the beautiful walk you did by walking along the line that it's the fracture, literally, along which ran the earthquake, which then destroyed L'Aquila and so forth. So you also, by walking and choosing certain types of walking, marking, pointing out a certain type of landscape. I mean, that story, do you conceive of it also as a political gesture, as a form of activism? Because by walking, you also make visible certain elements of your presence in that space, and also the reasons why one needs to remember certain passages, even when traumatic. And goes to both.
Well, as I said before, the walk itself can embrace also this idea of a political gesture or act. I always try to build the idea of walk, or build the structure of the walk in order that becomes a sort of poetical structure, so that has a strong also aesthetic structure to the to decide to move from one point to another. These 2 points has a strong meaning, not only for me, but probably for a community. So, for example, decide to walk in Genova in a specific moment in July, in a specific date. Of course, it's related to a political or social event that took place a few years ago. I was there, you also was there. So if you decide to make a walk in that place, you are make a specific choice. So you are invest your work with a particular meaning. It stay a walk, but the meaning, of course, change completely.
Just thinking also about Judith Butler and notes towards a performative theory of assembly, or just that moments of performing with your own bodies without using speech in certain instances, but allowing other forms to unfold. But again, I know it's a question we've been asking before, but I think it's interesting how you both are looking at the poetic somehow as a form of expression to move past certain limits of representation, because you both use the same adjective to describe what you're doing. So
yeah, I mean, I can explain it a little bit. So the past 2 years I've been doing projects in wetlands as well, and with like over 1 year in each location, walking through the landscapes, documenting them, their seasons, transformations. But I think it's really fascinating hearing your explicit use of walking as part of like a central narrative. For me, it's always just been a method I use as a means of making the work. This is like, it's a very corporal, intuitive thing. And I work with like a form of drifting. So I have a region, but then I drift around in it. And that creates a pattern I didn't know before I entered the place, where I never thought about going from one zone to another and pre-plan it. So that's very fascinating.
sorry, there's a question. Sorry, I was trying to figure out if there was any question coming through the chat. Sorry, not just browsing through my phone.
Hi there. Thanks so much for spending time with us tonight. I'm noticing something, especially in these images, that I see in a lot of other, especially literary art and the visual arts, which is especially to do with environmental questions. A combination of documentation, right, as sort of past events are brought back into a present, but also speculation. What would it be like if, right? But I also think that we're in this moment when environmental disasters are increasing, right, in frequency. So more and more people are actually, they don't need to speculate about it, right? So in a certain way, whether it's power outages or forest fires or floods, disasters. I'm wondering, I guess the question is, what will people need from the arts as they experience more environmental traumas as they are, since they're so thoroughly on the rise? Do you think the arts will need to change and to sort of provide other things for people?
Con il fatto che i disastri sono sempre meno, insomma, qualcosa di più speculare, ma sempre più presenti. Quindi non c'è bisogno di immaginarseli perché ti arrivano sulla porta di casa. Come pensi che l'arte possa rispondere? Si sta cambiando come in relazione a questi giorni?
Well, I try to answer with this, for example, which is a book that it's diary. I say instead to have a photo documentation, this is a diary. And it's a diary connect with a journey I did. 2 years ago, I think, 2 or 3 years ago, from Venice to L'Aquila, where the earthquake took place. So the book try to reach the point of this catastrophe, let's say, through a long walk. So investigate more the reason of the catastrophe through a slow documentation of the city that in Italy represent a sort of abandoned state, or we say hydrogeological risk. So it's a way to reflect about the reason of the catastrophe itself, and try to describe a scenario which is connect with it, in order to present to the public what we can do in order to increase our responsibility on, for example, right architectural approach. Because of course, if you are build a house in a certain way, you are increase the risk that this house will be destroyed. And if you are built up with a different materials or technique, you are more protected, let's say, by this risk. So it's a way to try to describe the problems through another perspective somehow. And
Please. And I would just like to point out that we'll need to wrap it up in about 10 minutes. So if anybody has questions, please bring them up, because then we will have to leave in a little while at least.
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much really for this very stimulating presentation you are giving at the moment about your work. I was fascinated by the way you described your walking as a kind of artistic practice, which is at the same time a metabolistic process. And my question would be, and to some extent you gave already with your last remarks a kind of answer to that, but I'm still curious about it. Do you consider your artistic articulation of your experience as part of the metabolistic experience? Or is it something you do after the experience? Or is the artistic articulation part of the metabolistic experience. It's clear? Or?
She's going to translate.
Okay.
Il risultato, il modo col quale poi tu conosci stato esprimi, fa parte di quel processo o viene dopo perché è emerge quel tempo? Difficult.
No,
Se vuoi puoi dirmelo in
it's a question that has to metabolize at the same time, you know. But I think it can be unanswered as well. So I mean, during the walk, there's also a process of metabolization, but is, I think, unconscious because you are in the walk itself, in the process itself. At the moment you stop it, so you detach yourself to the act itself. Then it starts the process of metabolization. I think it has maybe it's a stupid relation, but it's a relation also with food itself. I mean, it's at the moment you are eating something, or you are concentrate on this process, and later it start the digest. But in a way, it starts at the moment you start to eat something. But those are disconnect, but strictly connect at the same time. Yeah, but that's why also again, for me, it's useful to take some note, because watching the image after months or years as well, it comes to my mind some souvenir. So the metabolization start again in the long terms, and yeah.
I think we have.
I don't know if I answered.
Probably our last question, but is there anyone else who would need to ask one? Because otherwise we take two, maybe three. Come on.
Okay.
It's a rush. But
I'll
also,
try.
I mean, we can, of course, I mean, keep chatting a bit after we go offline, but yes, please.
Okay, yeah, thank you for the opportunity to exchange. I would also like to follow up on the idea of going full circle as a political act. And there's a certain connotation about walking in circles as like a redundancy, but I would be really interested in, did you already do or consider to walk the circle multiple times in a row? Because I think there might be something interesting happening in that scope of walking. If you start to recognize something as something that is familiar, but then there's this other meaning of recognizing as acknowledging it, and then also it might be an interesting way in relating our habits to our habitats. And if you go the circle multiple times in a row, that might be something that changes your perception in that way. And I was just interested in if that happened during that artwork.
I would also like to point out very simply, not that it's for me to start, but it's the first time that Giorgio is walking in a circle. Maybe we can take also the other couple of questions and then see if there is a way of replying.
Yeah, maybe as a first reaction, there's this beautiful artwork by Simon Faithfull, Going Nowhere, where he circles around an island in the North Sea, and this also reminded me of this work because it's very much about erosion and about what happens if you walk something like this, where there are tides and circles multiple times. So what happens to your perception if the landscape around you is changing? So just as a reaction to the former question. But as a artist, using a lot of walking practice from Amsterdam, I'm very excited about seeing this work and hearing about it. And in one of my projects, I walked the 700 kilometers that separates the lower part of the Netherlands to the higher parts, as a way of imagining a future situation in which the country could be flooded. And there, like, I was extensively preparing for it by using maps and talking to hydrologists. And I wondered here, did you use maps as well as a kind of preparation? And did you follow a certain line, or did you create a line by your walk? So what was, yeah.
Thank you. And if you'd like, so we hear them, I mean, the three of them, and then maybe find a way in between.
Okay, so last question, and it was about this future you are imagining. So when you put the spectators in front of your future landscape, what do you want them to feel? Have you already an idea of that? Because I'm studying novels who think about these kind of words, and very often you have the extinction attraction syndrome, ok? Quindi questa attrazione per l'estinzione, questo amore, like melancholia, something like that, or something like an elegy, l'elegia, the sense of loss. So I would like to ask you, which is your perception of that future, and also what do you think your work inspires in other people? Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. 3 simple questions, so to say.
Well, I start from the last to arrive to the first. Otherwise, I forgot the answer. But the work at the Rijksacademie and also the one at the Venice Biennial was work talking about the present, not the future. So for me, Field My Studio is say just this is the situation, this is our condition, and not in 100 years or before in the past. It's now. The only difference is that we have dikes that are protecting the Netherlands, and we feel this reality thanks to this structure. But in fact, the situation is something else. And also probably because I grew up here, and my relation with the water, it's a sort of symbiotic relation. That the water, it's always come into the city or move out the city. There's a sort of exchange. Then I was trying to find a similar scenario also in the place where I was not by chance, but by life fact, un caso della vita. Yeah. So it was a way to recognize the environment where I was placed in through Venetian perspective, let's say, or my own perspective. So it's a colonized process somehow. Then about the use of maps, where is okay. The use of maps, I always use maps because it helps me in order to orientate myself, at least in the beginning, because I can also say that after a long time of walk, you are able to orientate yourself naturally. This is something that we have in our DNA somehow, so we are able to really orientate ourselves when we start to be into the process of walk. But it's also true that sometimes I move out of the line that I define or I planned in the beginning. So the walk becomes another line, or draw another line, and this is actually what happened also in the case of Lacuna, because I was thinking in the beginning to pass through specific areas, and then I just discovered that was not possible to do, and that happened many times in other walks I did. And about the idea to walk in a circle, and especially to repeat the walk. Well, first I think that the circle has already a sort of symbolic meaning. It's of course relate with the idea of ritual, and also the fact that somebody repeats a movement or a path or a journey, also in a different moment, is connect, in my opinion, to the idea of a ritual act. So it happened that we decide to describe a circle or a path, and make the journey around this circle few times. And for me, this overlaps with the idea of ritual, actually. But I never did it. Most of the work I did, it's just one way act. I never repeat this journey. Only once I did by boat this journey around, but it was something different. It was not a walk. It was different.
Okay, I would like to thank everybody for having been here so long. Of course, on Zoom, you cannot perceive it, but there is no heating in ocean space. So the humidity, which is another form of water, has been seeping into our bodies. And it's quite intense after 1.5 hours. So thanks everybody for having been here. Thanks to the Anthropocene campus. Thanks to Giorgio and to Jakob, and also thanks to the local ecological knowledge, which comes from being close to a condition and learning from it. So, grazie mille and bye.